12, 13. All right. So why don't we go ahead and just get started, and we'll do a quick introduction. Welcome to the State Food Policy Call. My name is Ann Palmer, and I'm at the Center for Livable Future.
And I'm Rachel Santo, also at the Center for Livable Future.
And we have 3 different people presenting today. So we're going to start out with June Holley, and then June's going to take about a half an hour to talk about network strategies. And we are also doing this with an eye to how we can better support some of the groups working in a network fashion. And so we're looking forward to hearing from people afterwards, and we'd like to engage June with working with some of you further on this. So June's going to spend a half an hour talking about that, and we'll have some time for Q&A. Then we're going to hear from Sarah. Is it going to be you or Helen? I think it's Helen.
It'll be both of us.
Oh, okay. So Sarah and Helen Dombalis will be presenting for the National Farm to School Network, what's going on at the state level. And then Mark Winne is going to be talking about looking for some examples of strategies that have worked for state level groups and other networks. And so he'll be wrapping it up. So each one will take approximately a half an hour. So what we're going to do is start out by just having people on the line just introduce themselves. You can just say your name and affiliation, and we will just kind of go down. I'm going to call out numbers. I think that's probably the easiest. Oh, so we have, let's start up here. Who's it? Megan? Megan? No, not that. And you all can, do you know how to unmute yourself? There we go.
Hi, Megan Lovelace, Vice Chair of the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council and Western Slope Producer Representative and Farmer in Colorado.
Great.
Dawn.
There's my unmute. Hi, I'm Dawn Plummer. I'm with the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, and we are in conversations in Pennsylvania about how to move towards a statewide food policy council with the Department of Ag and Education at the state level.
Great. There's David.
Hi, yes. This is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is David Hudabat. I am a project coordinator at Livable in Colorado. So I am part of the Colorado Food Policy Network.
Great. Tina.
Hi, this is Tina Tamai. I'm with the Hawaii Food. Hi, Rachel. Hawaii Food Task Force, and now we have the additional layer of the Alliance. And we are kind of using some of that network method. And I'm with the Robert Johnson Cultural Health Fellowship. And we have been listening to June and Deborah Meehan on network. So I'm really excited.
Awesome. Nessa.
Okay, did I unmute myself?
You did.
Okay, good. I'm Nessa Richmond, and I am the still relatively new network director for the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. And it's the first time I've been on the call, so I'm glad to be here and to see most of you and hear all of you.
Great, thanks. Lauren?
Hi, this is Lauren Gwynn. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm here in Oregon. I'm at the Oregon State University Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems, and we are one of the backbone organizations for the statewide Oregon Community Food Systems Network. There's not policy in any of those titles, but I am heading up a policy committee within that network to build our network's capacity to work on policy issues, both at the organizational member level and also in our topical working groups and across the network. And we have some strategies where we'll be building that capacity over the coming year and going forward. So while we're not a policy council per se, policy and policy change are of course essential to the goals of this network and its members.
Great. Welcome. Amelie? And you might be on mute still. Amelie? Okay, she maybe stepped away. Danielle?
Oh, here we go. We have Amelie is with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association and the Ohio Food Policy Network, and Daniel has no mic, but he's a facilitator for the Knox County, Tennessee Food Policy Council, working to develop and revive a statewide policy group with a couple other stakeholders.
Great. And Susan? And I'm guessing you don't have do you not have a mic? Susan, are you there? Okay,
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah,
we can. Yeah.
Just introduce yourself.
Oh, it's Sue DeLandon. I'm from the Lehigh Valley Food Policy Council.
And you're working with Dawn on the PA stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica Spade. I'm with the Wisconsin Local Food Network. So we're not a food policy council, but we're a group that's pulling together all the people interested in food and agriculture in Wisconsin. And I'm brand new to this job, so I'm the new coordinator. So I'm very happy to kind of have it as part of my purview of my job now, to be involved with things like this and see what else is going on in the States. So thank you for letting me be here.
Did we miss anybody?
I think Ginny.
Oh, G.
Hey everybody, this is Ginny Knight. I work with a group called Community Food Strategies. We're out of North Carolina, and we are more of the network of food councils across the state, and I also am kind of staff-ish. There's several of our team members staff for the North Carolina State Food Policy Council, so excited to be here and learn from all of you.
I think that's everyone, but if we missed you, the scroll changes a lot. So if we missed you, please speak up now. Okay, great. All right, June, we'll hand it off to you.
Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about network strategies for your network. And some of you may know that I actually started my life. I've been consulting for 12 years now. But before that, I was part of ACENET, the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks. We had the third kitchen incubator in the country. And so, you know, my heart is really in the food work, though I work with all kinds of networks now. What we're going to do today is really talk about, it's going to be kind of like a fire hose experience. So I'm going to blast you with a lot of hopefully enticing stuff that make you want to learn more. But we're going to talk about network strategies for what I call all three levels of the food policy network: local, state, and national. And then we're going to practice a few things, have a little fun, and find out if you're interested in learning more. I'm really hoping you have your chat open. So somewhere on your screen, I think down at the bottom, you can click on the little balloon so you can write in the chat, because I'd love for you to both ask questions, but I'm also going to ask you to, you know, write some things like what you're doing in the chat as well. So if you can find that chat, that would be great. So basically today we're looking at your food policy lens through efforts through a network lens. We're like, you know, put on these nice little rose-colored glasses, and hopefully you'll look at your work a little bit different way. So, you know, I love what you all are doing. I mean, you're so advanced, and you don't even, I think, know how advanced you are in having sort of three levels of networks and just, you know, the things that you're doing. But, you know, the whole food system is so complex. And if we don't have networks that are just as complex as the system we're trying to shift and change, we're not going to have as much luck as we can. And so, you know, I've developed this thing. I've been studying a lot of different networks and working with a whole lot. And what we're finding is that really, to be really successful in shifting the system, you have to be working on all three levels. And maybe you're focusing on one, but overall there needs to be these three levels. Now, what the three levels do is depends on the particular network, but these are just a sampling of some of the activities so that the local level is working on, local policy development, leadership development, expanding the network, whereas the statewide networks tend to be really a little bit more about learning and sharing and comparing what people are doing and looking for all these patterns of success, and also supporting the network by what we call a support structure for networks, things like communications and training and structuring money differently. And then there's the national network, which is usually also about learning and sharing, and in an even more often structured way, and really big actions and trying to work on national policy change. So you have pieces of this already in place, and what we're going to talk about is how you can take even the next step and have them be more effective. And so what I've found is that by studying like about 500 different networks, the ones that were really starting to shift systems, and we call it a system shifting network, looks like this. And so if you're not familiar with network maps, this is a map that's made when all the dots represent people and the lines represent their relationships, and the colors represent difference. So, here you have a nice core of people who are really quite diverse and have been intentionally inclusive to make sure that lots of different voices are heard. And then they have the gray dots are your periphery. And lots of people forget that you have to really think explicitly about your periphery. And that's all people, you don't have day-to-day contact with them, but this is like maybe the funders or different expertise, people in other communities sometimes are there. And so, it's really important to have that periphery and everybody having access to that. But a system shifting networks are, besides being diverse and intentionally inclusive, people in them are interacting as peers. There's no bosses here, and people are taking initiative, and they are self-organizing collaborative projects and experiments. And what that does, and we'll talk more about that self-organizing piece in a minute, but just that people are forming collaborative projects. And that creates a lot more leaders and people with skills. But still, the decision-making and much of the decision-making and action is pretty decentralized, even though there might be some coordinating action there. And the piece that we really forget and don't spend enough time on, because we've got those to-do lists, is learning, sharing and learning, and deeply trying to figure out what worked, what didn't work, about what we did, and sharing that with others. So those are just what we need is for each of those three networks we talked about to look like this. And we'll talk about ways that you can think about mapping your network as well. This was made on a platform called Kumu.io if you're interested, and that could be something that we talk about and learn. So, how do you get to a system shifting network? Well, lots of people started out, people might know each other a little bit working in food policy, but they really don't have connections with a lot of other people until usually there's a group like your state networks, your national network that come along and then start trying to reach out to all the different groups working out there. But, and lots of times the state network has training kinds of sessions, kind of putting out training for people. But it's dangerous to get stuck here because most hub and spokes are mainly one directional, or even if they're two directional, they're not really spending a lot of time connecting all the people in the network so they can interact without going through that hub. And so the way you do that is through this next step that we call the self-organizing network. And that's where you start encouraging people to form collaborative projects and reaching out to new people in their communities and experiment and try something out. And if enough of those projects start happening and you've got a really good communication and learning system, then you can move into that system shifting network stage. But it's not all that easy to get in. We'll talk a little bit about what it takes to get into the self-organizing stage in a minute. Okay, let's see. Somebody tell me. Okay, great. Okay, so just to sum up this part, you know, why are these so important, such an important strategy? Why do they work so well? Because you're getting lots more people involved. Just think if you had 10 times as many people involved in food policy and trying to shift the food system, you know, we could maybe get over that tipping point. We're going in the right direction, but we need a lot more people involved. We need more diversity, more about people who are on the margins in our communities or underrepresented, more new approaches that get generated if you bring in different people with different perspectives. And then if you use this idea that what you're doing is not planning, you don't really know how to shift the system completely, or we would probably be there. But this idea that you're experimenting to find out what is going to really shift the system. So in this kind of network, you get a lot more action, a lot more learning, more leadership, usually access to new resources, and voila, you know, we're seeing more and more that are really beginning to move into that transformational stage. So how do you get there? Well, there's these 4 strategies, and we're just going to touch on them today, but you know, there's activities you can do in each one, and they're all tied together by a new kind of leadership, that's network leadership. And so the align one is about, like, how can you move together, forward together? And, you know, networks are really not all about trying to get everybody to agree, because they thrive on like different perspectives and point of view. But it helps if people have some sense of overlapping purpose, you know, that their purposes are somehow aligned and that they have values, these values that I call network values. And we're going to do a little survey so you can see how your network values have shifted. And that's how you get alignment, rather than through trying to get a mission or a vision or whatever, so much in networks. Then this idea that you connect strategically. So it's about connecting, but you want to connect so people start doing stuff together. You can bring 2 people together and say, hey, you're both interested in the same thing. How can I help you make something happen? And then if people are learning, if lots of projects are getting together and learning and figuring out what's really going to make a difference, where are the leverage points, you know, then you can really start getting somewhere. But the key that we often forget is networks need support. They need good communications. They need money structured the way that's really going to help support collaboration and so forth. So just ask me questions. I know I'm going through this a little fast, but you can put questions in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to see how where our values stand in terms of network values. And this checklist we're going to do right now, and then I'm going to jump out of this share screen. Oh, how do I get out of here? Oh, it's underneath here. That's what it is. I'm going to have you, I'm going to put this link in the chat, and you're going to take this, and this is a great survey you can give to your networks too. We have different versions that I'll show you that, you know, you can both look at your own personal values, but also your networks or your organizations, and that really is great. So there's a link for you to check on. And then I'm going to stop sharing screen here real quickly, and I'm going to show you the results. So go ahead and take it. It's only 10 questions. I'm going to stop this share, and then I'm going to click on this myself. And everybody being able to access it. And then I'm going to share screen here. And hopefully by the time you're done, I will be able to show you the results. And you can kind of let me know in the chat, you know, if you're done or whatever. And but just do your first first responses. So these are just some. We have a list of about 40 values. This is just a nice place to start. Oops, I got to submit my answers. Okay, oh, we have a couple quickies who really got this done fast. So I'm going to keep refreshing this. And you can see we have about, we have 6 people taking it. Let's wait for a few more, or 7 now. We'll reload this page, keep reloading. Oh, 9. Okay. We're not trying to make you feel rushed or anything. But, okay, we got 13 responses. Let me know if anybody is 14. Oh boy, this group is really, you're networky. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop now. We've got 14 responses. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's just take a look at this and scroll down. So open to new ideas, pretty open to new ideas. Not everybody is strongly agreeing, but everybody is either agreeing or strongly agreeing. Okay, let's keep going down. Okay, how about the transparency one? Does anybody want to take off their mic? We don't have that many people, and just say, what do you notice about the transparency one?
June, we don't see what you're seeing on our screen.
Oh, you don't?
Unless,
yeah. Okay, well, let me try to share screen again, because, here, let me try it again. Somehow it didn't work. Okay, now do you see it?
Now we got it.
Thank you. Yeah, you got to interrupt me, because I get on a roller coaster here. So, okay, so let's start over again. So you can see, open to new ideas. We're pretty good on that one, right? Diversity in our lives, pretty good. What about transparency? What are you noticing about transparency? We're scoring a little bit lower on that one, right? Opportunity seeking, well, you guys are really great here. Okay, look at this one. How about number 9, comfortable with uncertainty? What do you think that's about? Anybody want to just say something about that?
This is Megan. I would say that if perhaps if you are a nonprofit or beholden to certain funders, it's possible that in order to obtain deliverables, uncertainty may feel a little bit uncomfortable. So while that doesn't work in every situation, but perhaps for people reliant on funders for their organization, that's uncertainty sounds scary.
Yeah. And, you know, part of what we've got to do, and I'm working a lot on this, like with Robert Wood Johnson, they're changing to a network organization, we're hoping. Yeah, funders have to change too, because, you know, they're all about these deliverables and outcomes and plans right now. And what we're saying is, oh, that's not necessarily, you know, I'm not totally against planning. You know, you want to do it, especially in your collaborations, you need plans. But yeah, and then that idea when you're dependent on other sources of money and the feeling uncertain about, is that going to be coming in or whatever. So, and then how about letting go of control? What's the issue there? Anybody else want to talk about that? Jessica, what's the issue with letting go of control?
I'm just laughing. It's very funny. I am one of the ones that probably put a little lower. I don't remember exactly what I put, but it's similar to like that uncertainty. What Megan said is this idea of, you know, you want to know what's coming and to have a clear plan, especially when your job relies on grants or, you know, people contributing money for that. So, I get that tension. I'm definitely a big proponent of collaborative planning and strategizing, but I often am like, I have one vision of the way it should go, or in my head, the way it should go. and then in a meeting somebody kind of derails that, and it's good because it's a good suggestion, but it always just takes me a minute. It's like I can hear the gears just grinding and then it just takes me that second, and then I just have to remember, like, we're better together, and we're gonna be a better plan if I let go of that. But I know that's something probably all do, but
it's a real struggle and especially you're thinking, yes.
This is Tina. I was going to add, I think one of the things that I find with networking or using this network strategy is that a lot of it, I mean, in order for it to work, I think the group really has to be free to evolve and to process, and you never know where that takes you. And part of that process is looking for opportunities and linking and going into that direction. And like you said, I don't think any of the funding is in that direction right now, because they want definite outcomes within a time period. You're forced to follow certain strategies which may not work for your community. And there is a lot of people processing. So, and that is very uncertain. I think when you can maximize it, you see the fruitions of it. But and the other thing is there is no funding for facilitating that. It's only funding for the specific programmatic areas. So I would like to see this change a whole lot.
That'd be a fun thing to work on together. And I'm working with a bunch of funders, but there are even ways you can write proposals with outcomes that are networky. But so that is something I've been thinking about a lot. Okay, well, so it's really, and taking risks is also harder for people here, but really so part of the thing is you've got lots of strengths to build on. You've got lots of ones where you're almost all 4s and 5s, and so it's important to realize that and keep building those, and then working on these challenge areas. And so this is a great thing to give your networks, to get them starting to think about how they might be more networky. And I know some people are asking questions, and we'll try to hold them and get to them at the end. So now I'm going to go back to the slides, if I can find them here. This is always a challenge here. Okay, wait, I got to do slide share again. This will just take just a second. We've got to get used to this new technology. Oh, here we are. Okay, great. Can you all see that now? See the screen? Let me make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, so you can see this is a great kind of activity, and I'm going to be giving you links so that you can have access to this survey, and you can save it with a different name and use it, or print it out even, and get people talking about it. Okay, so now let's talk about simple network building for locals, because we're not going to probably have enough time to get all this. But, so local policy councils have been doing fabulous policy work, but the problem is that many don't really see themselves as networks and don't know what that could mean, like this whole idea of the system training. So they're not getting enough people. They're not thinking enough about how they can expand, because it's hard to think, oh, if we could bring more people in, that's more people to manage and coordinate. So some simple activities that you can do, and you'll notice down at the bottom of this slide, which you'll be getting these slides, there's a link, and you can directly click on that to get the network toolkit. It's full of activities that you can do next week, with your network. But when you do mapping, you can get a food policy council group together, or even you could do this your national group, and try to put everybody's names using Post-it notes. There's Post-it notes you can do virtually too. I've done that as well. And the main thing you're trying to do is get people to think of themselves as a network of people and connections, and who's missing and who could they reach out to. So it's a great activity, and the directions and everything are in that network toolkit. Another thing is, like, how do you get started on self-organizing? is at a meeting, especially a community meeting where you're trying to recruit people, you ask people, what do you most want to work on in the next couple months with other people? And they put it on a Post-it note with their name, and you can see here on the left that, you know, and then you have them take a break, get somebody to cluster them into several clusters and have those clusters meet and start talking about what they might do together. Again, there's a self-organizing toolkit, and it's got directions on how you can do that. So these are some easy things that you can do. And so in the chat, if you could just share, like, how could you imagine doing these activities with some of your local networks? So yeah, too many people and they're not working together. Well, you don't see, the problem is we have this around the table idea. We have to all get around the table and agree. Self-organizing means no, you just ask people what they want to do, and then your job changes to supporting them in doing these different kinds of activities. And it sounds a little complicated, but it's really not that hard once you get started. We're working on a Robert Wood Johnson virtual community of practice, and we're only on our second call tomorrow, and already we have 10 self-organized projects going, and we're giving them a little bit of support the first time. After that, people usually learn how to do it. Okay, so let's talk about, like, you know, on the state level or any level, where you want people to learn together. And I've been doing these things called learning pop-ups, where people say, hey, what do you want to learn together? And people just step up to the plate. They set up a Zoom. Zoom is free for 40 minutes and only $150 a year. And so you get people doing these learning pop-ups where they learn how to initiate and set up something together, and then learn and help each other. I have in the self-organizing book, I believe, is this idea of a peer assist, where you help people learn. How's our time doing? Give me a deadline.
So we should probably got about 5 minutes.
Oh,
5 minutes. Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to have to, because I do want to take some questions at the end. Another thing that's really important is network leadership. And you'll see in the network toolkit, there is a network weaver checklist. And I suggest when you get these slides, you look over these and see which ones are your strengths, which ones do you need to work on, and which ones do you want to learn more about. Because being a network leader is really different than a traditional leader. It's much more about helping people collaborate, being a catalyst, and supporting and coaching people. So anyway, if you have ideas about how you might use them, I did that awfully fast. You know, just put it in the chat. But let's just cover a couple other things that you could do. And one is that communications in networks has to be two-way. And lots of our stuff, we're used to broadcasts, sending out e-newsletters. But I give this little worksheet, and in the toolkit that I mentioned, there's a blank copy of this where you can think about how can you help people share and discuss information and ideas? How can you help them generate and share new ideas? How can you help them cluster, self-organize, build relationships, and track and learn and change? And you've got to get a set of things like Zoom and Google Docs and whatever that are going to help people so they can reach each other without having to go through you, because that's when things get powerful, and then you don't have to be in control. They can do things, and as long as they're sharing back and everybody's transparent, it works amazingly well. You know, at AceMet in Southeastern Ohio, we probably in a year would have 100 different projects going related to food systems. And it worked out, you know, this is a town that's really rich, Athens, Ohio, if you know about that, really rich. We have more microbrewers per person than almost any community around, if that's a plus for any of you. But the one last thing is, one thing that makes this all work, the self-organizing work, are innovation or activation funds. Very small amounts of money to help provide incentive to people to self-organize. And oh, they're being so successful, amazingly successful. You do them once or twice, and then people learn how to self-organize, and you don't need to do that anymore. So we've got to wrap up here. What I'd like you to do is, there's just a little survey, but then in the group chat, what I'd like to do is just, if you can click on this survey, I'm gonna put it in the chat here. It's only 2 questions. And if you can do that, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't send that to the whole group here. We'll try that again. Okay, then what I'd like to do is take some questions from people. I'll look at this, maybe some of the folks, Center for Livable Futures, can you summarize any of the questions that people had that maybe we can take some time to go over?
I'm thinking, June, that maybe the best thing to do would be, for a lot of these questions, we could have you respond afterwards, an email, and we could send it out to everyone. But maybe one that would be easier to talk about would be, how do you operationalize action learning in food policy councils?
Oh, well, that's something that, and whoever did that, if you put your email in, we're going to have a little pop-up to learn about, especially about what I call deep reflection and this action learning. Are you particularly talking about the learning part? Because that is really exciting. We're making real progress on that in terms of, the thing learning needs is contrast. And so it's not just one project together, but that's why these groups are like this one are so precious, because you have people doing slightly different things, and then they talk about what they're doing, and then you can really begin to notice patterns. I have a free on the WW Network Weaver site. There's a free thing called 20 Questions for Deep Reflection that you can use. But I think really part of the thing is making sure you set aside time. I'll never forget, some of you may know Beth Cantor, who's like a real guru of tech network kinds of stuff. And the first time we had a conversation with her, we spent 30 minutes talking, and then she said, stop, it's time to reflect. And we spent 30 minutes talking about the first 30 minutes, and we made all these incredible breakthroughs and insights about how technology could support networks. And so, it's almost, you can say, you can't spend too much time reflecting and learning on what you're doing, because that's where you're going to make the breakthroughs and get the insights that allow you to do things differently and in a hopefully more successful way. So thanks for being on here. I'm going to make sure that you have the link, right? Center for Livable Futures. You have the link to the whole folder, because it's got all these different resources in it for you. And only thing I ask, if you use a survey, make sure you make a copy and move it someplace else. And then that'll take out all the answers that you did on that, and you can use it yourself. So you've got this chat, and I will send the answers to Center for Livable Futures, and they will pass it on to you. So thanks for having me. Let me stop the share, and I'll say goodbye. Great talking with you.
Thanks, June. We look forward to having you back. All right. So I think we're going to turn it over to Helen and Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Helen Dombalis. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Policy with the National Farm to School Network. I'm based in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I was delighted to hear a number of folks on the line that are also in Colorado. And I am filling in today for Maximilian Merrill, our Policy Director. As you all probably know, the Senate Farm Bill is in full swing this week. He's in the midst of finalizing 2 amendments we're going to have on the Senate floor. So I have been the policy director before, so hopefully I do an okay job filling in for him rather last minute. And it's great to see so many familiar faces. And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Sarah Goldman, and I'm the Policy Fellow with the Farm to School Network, and I'm here based in DC.
She's right in the thick of it. And Sarah is going to do a screen share. We have some slides for y'all. And I'll go ahead and get started. So just want to do a very quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the National Farm to School Network, what we do, how we do it, what we mean by farm to school. And we want to do that because I think it sets the stage and gives the context for how you all in your roles with food policy councils can connect with our partners through the national network. So you'll see on this next slide that Sarah's going to pull up, we are, as our name implies, a national network. So we have what we call core and supporting partners in all 50 states and DC. So these are other organizations, so other nonprofits, state agencies, whether it's a Department of Agriculture, Education, or Health, university partners. So other organizations that are really at the core of the national network, they kind of help funnel things out and then feed information up to the national level. We have a national staff, small national staff around the country, including Sarah and myself, an advisory board, and then national network members. So over 20,000 folks that get our monthly newsletter for free. If you're not already a member and want to be, you can go on our website to sign up. But again, I wanted to really flag on this page that I encourage you to go to our website, farmtoschool.org, and check out, if you're not already familiar with who our partners are in the states that you're located in, to connect with those folks. On the next slide, you'll see, and this really, I think, is helpful to lay the groundwork for when we actually start to talk about specific policies, what we mean when we say farm to school. So we call them the 3 core elements. You'll see in the upcoming slide, we like things in threes. So one is the literal farm to school, and that's the procurement, where you're actually working to get local farm fresh foods. And common myth here is it's just fruits and vegetables, but it's not. So proteins, all types, there's even seafood to school or boat to school. So all types of products into school cafeterias and other child nutrition programs like snacks, taste tests. Second is school gardens, pretty self-explanatory, giving kids opportunities to actually get their hands dirty and really experience growing food. And third is food and agriculture education. And that one usually needs some explanation because it's everything from integrating food and ag into curriculum, so actually attaching it to, curriculum standards, but it's also things like taking kids out to a farm, bringing a farmer to the classroom or the cafeteria, doing a taste test, a cooking demonstration. My favorite example of this is probably out of Tucson, Arizona. A school that I visited a few years ago had developed a really thorough farm to school program, and they had kids that were learning in their math class about how to take averages. So the kids weren't just sitting at their desks, they were measuring the temperature of the compost out in the school garden, and then they would keep little notebooks and they'd learn how to take averages of the temperatures over the course of the week or over the course of the month. And they were using scales to learn about how to weigh the food waste that came out of the classroom, or out of the cafeteria at the end of the day. So those are some good examples. On this next slide, again, the why of farm to school, we call it the triple win, the fact that kids win, for example, eat more servings of fruits and veggies, which we know if they're growing it in the garden, if they're meeting the farmer, if they're having that experience, they're going to be more willing to taste, try, and then hopefully like it. Farmers win, as you all obviously know, keep a bigger share of the dollar when you shorten supply chains. And the communities win, there's that economic multiplier effect, of course, and then the fact that we know kids take what they learn home to their families, and then it impacts healthy eating habits at home. So if you want to know more about the research behind all of this, my favorite fact sheet that we have is called The Benefits of Farm to School. It's essentially a lit review. So it goes through research that's been done, kind of categorized into this triple win. And if you just Google benefits of farm to school, you can find that, or we can follow up and send it to folks. So next slide, again, I know I'm probably talking quickly, but just want to make sure folks have this context. So as a national network, we do 3 things, and that's serve as a hub for information, for networking, and for advocacy. So in other words, we connect people to resources so that resource that I just mentioned, the benefits fact sheet, the state policy guide that we'll talk about here in a moment. We have a conference, the Farm to Cafeteria Conference, every other year. CLF was there recently in Cincinnati for that. Monthly webinars. Networking, we connect people to people. So those are opportunities for you all and our members to connect with our state partners and with one another. And then thirdly is people to policy. And that's what we're going to dig into now, is looking at the ways that we advocate at the federal level. So federal policy, state, where we'll focus the majority of our energy today. And then also have dabbled at local level policies. So looking at things like city policies that can support school district procurement, or school wellness policies that can support farm to school activities. So on the next slide, we've got 3 resources that align with our current strategic plan for 3 state strategies that we are promoting during the 2017 to 2019 timeframe. So those are state policies, state farm to school networks, and state farm to school positions. So today we're just going to focus on the first of those. So you'll see more in a moment about the latest iteration of this state legislative survey that came out in November. I'm sorry, I'm getting lots of G-chats, so let me close my chat here. I apologize about that. So we'll talk about that more in a moment. Second is state networks. So I mentioned those core and supporting partners, and I think this is a good opportunity for y'all through the councils that you're a part of to look at that resource on our website and see if your state has a state network right now. And by network, we defined it broadly. So it could be an official network. It could be a task force. So Colorado, for example, has a farm to school task force. It could be some sort of other working group that's part of a broader like anti-hunger coalition. But the point with this, and the reason we wanted to mention this, being that there are all of these different ways that farm to school partners in states organize themselves, and this resource that we just came out with shows those different models and gives y'all, through your council work, opportunities to tap into these networks that are in many states already organized. And then third is state positions. So we are really making a push to institutionalize farm to school. We've done that at the federal level through the Office of Community Food Systems. We're also looking at doing that at the state level. So getting more state farm to school positions in state agencies. So for example, for the CLF folks based in Maryland, both the Department of Ag and the Department of Ed in Maryland have folks that spend at least a portion of their time dedicated to farm to school. So state agencies, and then also university extension programs. So again, mentioning all this to make sure y'all know that you can look at these resources specific to your state and see all of the people and players that are already involved in farm to school efforts in your state that you may be able to team up with if you're not already. So Sarah, will you go to the next slide? We are now finally going to dig into the policy specifics. So this is a map some of you may have already seen. This is from that November 2017 resource that I mentioned on the last slide. So this is what we like to call our heat map. So this is looking at state farm to school policies across a spectrum. So that lightest color at the top of that bar is states that as of our documentation, as of March of 2017, had no farm to school policy. And then it goes up. We've started over time to kind of identify what the gold standards or best practices are in state farm to school policy. And you'll see them listed as funded farm to school program and then funded farm to school coordinator position, which I just referenced. Really, and this is not surprising, but it took some research to do this, what we are finding is actually moving the needle the most on state farm to school policy are policies where the state budget is investing money in farm to school. So that could be one of 3 things, either a coordinator position, so actually paying for an FTE or a percentage FTE, focus on farm to school. Second is like a grant program, so some sort of opportunity to really fuel and fund farm to school activity. And then third is additional reimbursement policies. So examples here are things like Michigan, and I'll talk more about this in a little while as well, but Michigan a couple of years ago passed their 10 cents a meal bill. So this is where the state budget committed 10 additional cents per school lunch that includes a local component. So anytime the school meal includes a Michigan product, they now get 10 cents more. And that really goes a long way towards helping schools with farm to school. And by the way, I should mention that Michigan bill is a pilot. So it hasn't yet been funded high enough to support every single school district in the state. But it's been a pilot that's been highly successful. So those three, again, funded farm to school position, funded farm to school activities, e.g. through a grant, and three, funding for additional reimbursements, are the three types of state policies that we're seeing really move the needle the most. Now, that being said, there are obviously other steps that need to be done to kind of lay the groundwork and set the stage and really get buy-in. So if you're seeing that your state is a lighter color on this map, that's certainly okay. It means that you've got some opportunities to kind of really start to have a conversation with folks about forming a task force, for example, or passing a policy to support Farm to School Month with a proclamation. So some of those ones that are the lighter colors on there. So Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide, you saw on that map one way that we're categorizing the various types of state policy. On this next map, you'll see another way of looking at those same categories. So coordinator positions, grant programs, reimbursements I mentioned. In the last couple of years, we've seen some more effort specifically on farm to early care and education. So that 0 to 5 age group of littlest eaters, which we know is really important because that's when, healthy habits are forming. And it's the time of life where parents are most engaged in their kids' lives. So those types of policies. And then we put in red here, Sarah flagged the task forces, councils, working groups, because in fact, some food policy councils have helped, and we'll talk about this more in a couple of minutes, but some food policy councils have actually helped through state farm to school policy to solidify their own existence, or have helped to create a council or task force that will further farm to school activity. So in Colorado, as I mentioned, several years ago, they passed a bill that formed a Colorado Farm to School task force. And then I'll talk about Mississippi in a couple of minutes. So you can see lots of different types of policies. And in a minute, Sarah will explain a little bit more about those two columns, proposed versus enacted. And then down at the bottom, I do want to just flag that resolutions or proclamations. Those again are things like Farm to School Month. So no cost bills, but things that are really important to actually get folks excited and really start the conversations about farm to school at the state level. So Sarah, you want to go to the next slide. We want to show you some of the trends. So this is just in the last couple of years. Farm to school is hot and we love it and it's exciting. People are realizing and seeing those triple win benefits. They're realizing that it's very cross-sectoral. Farm to school really uniquely sits at the intersection of public health, agriculture, education, food systems, the environment. So you can see here some of the most popular types of programs or policies in recent years are some of those that I just mentioned that are really what we're seeing as the gold standards or best practices. And then on the next slide, I'm going to pass this to Sarah where she can start to talk about some of these trends in more detail.
Hi, yeah. So a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past couple of months is looking really and digging into this graph. As you can see over time, both the number of proposed farm to school bills and enacted have been on the rise, which is really great news for us and for all of you. It means people are active and engaged and wanting to get policies passed. But as you see over time in 2017, especially the number of proposed farm to school bills is really high, but those getting passed and those getting funded doesn't meet meet that proposed line. So we've really tried hard and are starting to think really strategically about what we can do as a network to support people in states like you all who are working to make sure that farm to school is enacted and legislation is brought to fruition. So that's kind of the purpose of this graph, is to just show that there is a discrepancy and there's a lot of work to do, not only to bring bills to legislature, but also to make sure that those bills go through and are funded. And the other thing that I wanted to mention here too was just set realistic goals when you're doing state policy work. A lot of farm to school legislation requires a lot of work on the ground, and making sure that your capacity and the needs that you're advocating for are matched is really important. So here we've highlighted a number of types of bills that you could work on as policy councils. And as you can see listed at the top are those high political advocacy supports that are needed. So if you're looking to do this type of action, you probably need really strong networks and people who've engaged over time for a long period of time. And then there at the bottom, you can see there's also a number of actions that you can take as well that require a little bit less organization. They could be the first steps that you take if you wanted to get some policies proposed. So examples are farm to school proclamations or resolutions, for example. Helen, do you want to jump in and add anything?
No, I think you well covered it. Yeah, I think, just kind of going back to that earlier slide at that heat map and seeing where your state is currently and then what the potential is. You could go right to some of these things that require more effort, but really need to think about what is required and what capacities there are, and really figure out what the political feasibility is of doing these various activities. And then on this slide, so I've referenced examples a few times. We really, now that we've talked about who we are, what we do, how we do it, kind of farm to school 101, and then looking at state farm to school policy, really want to bring it to life more and tie it back to the work that you all do with food policy councils and farm to school. So this little pinwheel, I'm not sure what y'all actually call it, but the screenshot on the right, let's say, the colorful screenshot, I did pull this from the Food Policy Council database and just took out the part that's related to food procurement so that y'all could hopefully read it on the slide there. So these are some of the examples that we are aware of where food policy counselors are supporting farm to school. So New Mexico, going back to best practices in farm to school policy around additional reimbursements. For a number of years, New Mexico has worked annually on an appropriations bill for a bill called the New Mexico Grown Produce Bill. So that actually means that the state budget provides additional funding on an annual basis through appropriations to pay for New Mexico fruits and vegetables. Their Food and Ag Policy Council in the state has been for a number of years and still is the lead, working on that. So that's really such an excellent example. And Mark, who I believe is on the line or joining shortly, has as well been involved in that. So that's a really good example, I think, for you all to look at is, how you have a state council that really puts so much behind a bill like this. And they've, to date, as I mentioned, focused on produce, so fruits and vegetables. In the last about year, they've also been looking at creating a similar piece of legislation for beef, so New Mexico beef, and getting an additional pot of funding to pay for New Mexico beef that would go to New Mexico schools. So again, just a really strong example of the role of food policy councils with farm to school policy. Secondly is Mississippi, and I believe, yes, this one's mentioned. In fact, both of these are mentioned if you look at that little pinwheel, the Mississippi Food Policy Council. So this is a great example of how they had a food policy council, then advocated to create an interagency farm to school council. So you've got this more general food policy council at the state level, and they said, let's work on a specific bill that will create a council. In some states it's called a task force, but specifically to focus on organizing around farm to school in the state. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, oftentimes these state councils or task forces really are the foundation of what eventually becomes these state farm to school networks that then go on to work on policies, work on coordinator positions. So I think this being a really good example with Mississippi of how that's happened. 3 years ago, Mississippi went on to actually start a statewide Mississippi Farm to School network. So they now have staff people, they have funding, they have a logo and a website and an advisory board, but they now host a farm to cafeteria conference. So I think that's a really good example to see how, New Mexico was about their policy getting money to pay for local products in schools. With Mississippi, it's really about how the Food Policy Council created this farm to school council that has now supported state network development. And then I know that primarily today we're talking about state policy, but I thought I'd be remiss in not also mentioning the role that food policy councils have played through cities in farm to school policy. So for example, thinking about things like the Good Food Purchasing Policy or GFPP that came out of LA and is now spread to a number of other cities. So that's broader than just farm to school and broader than just school procurement. It has to do with city procurement, but it has in a number of cities included farm to school. And we're really big proponents of GFPP. And that's a great example, again, at the local level of how food policy councils have been and can support farm to school. So with that, I think that wraps up. Sarah, do we have anything else? Do you have anything else to add before we go to Q&A? Oh, Sarah, I think you went back on mute.
Oh, I don't right now. But I would love to hear some questions if people have them.
Yeah. And actually, I meant to do this at the beginning, but chime in or raise your hand if you've already worked on farm to school, or if you're wanting to work on farm to school. I meant to do that at the beginning.
Thanks, Helen and Sarah. So you guys can go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can also type in the chat box.
Clear as mud.
I have a question. I'm Jessica from Wisconsin. I started to try to type it, but realized it's a little too complicated to type. So in that school legislation map where all the different states are different colors, and the kind of highest level is that funded farm to school coordinator position. I'm just thinking about that kind of, what in 5 more years, what's the higher level going to be in that map? Because I feel like Wisconsin's ready for that. In talking with the farm to school coordinators, which are mostly AmeriCorps Vista volunteers who are not really getting compensated for the amount of time and passion that they're putting into these. And a lot of times these are young people that are kind of get a job in a county that they're not from, and then they don't have the kind of like relational capacity that they need in order to really provide. They're charged with this huge job of, okay, create local supply chains in this area. But then they're only there for 6 months to a year and then they leave. So then they're not, I don't know, there's just a lot of kind of things. And for me, I think about if it was longer positions that was better funded, that those volunteers right now would be able to make a lot, like kind of longer impacts. So kind of what's the next level that you guys envision?
Yeah, good question. I mean, eventually universal school meals that are all local. I kind of say that half jokingly, but half serious. If you look at like Brazil, Brazil has these incredible policies around, all meals for all kids that go to school are free. And they have I believe it's 70%, don't quote me on that, mandate that the food that's provided come from the province where the school is. So Big picture, you know, and that's something federally that we're going to be working on, since we do a lot of federal policy work, is kind of thinking about that. But for Wisconsin specifically, and this applies certainly to other states, you know, y'all do in Wisconsin through DATCAP, your Department of Ag, you have that position. But I think you hit on something that's really important, is the sustainability of those positions. So for example, last year, your position got written by the governor out of your budget, and then there was this whole like advocacy push to get that position back and included. So I think getting the positions to a point where the value is seen over the long term, so that they're not going through, and Wisconsin is one of a number of states where we've seen this, they're not going through those like ebbs and flows of like, yay, let's get this position, and then, well, the state budget and, you know, doesn't have the funding to keep it going. That would be one thing. And then the other thing is, you know, Wisconsin, to my knowledge, doesn't have this, and most states don't yet, is that additional reimbursement. So actually leveraging state dollars to fund state products that go into those school districts, so that kids really get to have that opportunity to experience local food while also stimulating the local economy and creating jobs. So that's really like, that's a gold standard and something that we want to see all states do.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna transition over to Mark, unless I don't think there's any other questions at this time. Helen and Sarah, thank you so much. It was great to hear you. And if you guys also, we'll make sure to connect the resources when we send out the email.
Yes, we can follow up with those. And I am going to need to hop off for another meeting, but thank you all for the invitation to join today and for all the incredible work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mark, are you?
I'm going to share Mark's slides.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah. All right. Okay. Mark, here, just unmuted you.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
How many people are on this? I'm just curious.
Right now,
13.
13.
Okay. All right, well, good afternoon, I guess, in most places, maybe good morning in the West Coast. I am going to share some thoughts and actually just help a discussion around what it takes to develop a successful state food policy council. This kind of immediate interest came out of some recent work that I've been doing in a couple of states around the country to who are at early stages of developing food policy councils. And I would say that, you know, it is still often a struggle, and not just a struggle to get them started, but also, of course, a struggle to have them operating effectively. And, you know, so I've started to like look at what are some of the success factors, as well as what are some of the barriers that food policy councils have come across. And so I'm going to have only 2 slides really that are a very rough compilation of some of what I think I've learned over the last few years. So just quickly, the sources of my information are, of course, myself and the work that I have done with state food policy councils, including co-founding Connecticut's Food Policy Council, and also helping with the startup of the New Mexico Food and Ag Policy Council. And also a lot of work I've done providing training and technical assistance to states and groups that are interested in starting state food policy councils. But also in the course of doing that, I did a little work with Phyllis Schulman, who is in Washington State. And Phyllis was very active in Seattle with doing food policy work there, and later became involved in attempting to start a Washington State Food Policy Council. And the course of doing that, she did some research and said, all right, what have we learned from states around the country so far? So some of what I have here comes from her. And then also a little more recently, a team out of the University of Minnesota did some work also trying to take a look at state food policy councils and say, all right, what do we know based on the work of others? And they compiled some strengths and weaknesses and challenges and so forth. And then lastly, I had a chance to chat with people very recently in two states, one Tennessee and Mississippi, about what they've encountered over the years. Tennessee was not successful in establishing a food policy council. So some lessons learned come from, of course, failures, or at least false starts, with the hope that there'll be second or even sometimes a third try. So that's the source of this. So let me go through this quickly, and let me give you a little more background where an item may not be real clear. But one thing that this list here is really looking at what tends to, what are the attributes of a successful state food policy council. And number one is that there is, in fact, a core group that's leading the effort. A group of people that are committed, and they come from different sectors within their state's food system, usually government and non-government mixed together, working together, and that the effort and the leadership is really distributed among those participants, not so much with one person or a very, very small and limited number of people taking the lead, but that effort is distributed and owned, so to speak, by a larger group, and we'll call it a core group. Also of importance is, and some of this just may be obvious, but we don't always find it happening, is that you have staff and consultants available, and that they can do some of the work, they can do some of the organizing, some of the research, the convening of meetings, facilitation of meetings. All these things are very important to the startup phase, especially. So having some body or several bodies or an organization or agency that's willing to commit some time is extremely, really quite important in terms of the early stages. Some funding, and I say some funding because obviously it's desirable to have funding and to be able to pay some of your startup costs. But on the other hand, I've sometimes seen groups that wait for funding, like they wait and they wait and they wait, and they don't necessarily get it, and so they don't move along briskly, if at all. And so cobbling things together, but also recognizing that you do have costs, and you can't rely forever on the in-kind contributions or in-kind good graces of other people. Generosity of others is important, but also don't wait forever. Communication capacity, having the means by which to communicate among yourselves, of course, internally, but also as you're developing externally as well. I've seen a couple of food policy councils that they communicate relatively well among a small inner circle, but 2 years have passed and nobody else in the state even knows about them. And so they haven't taken the time to create a website or develop some of their social media skills, or just do anything to project themselves outward, even attending other meetings around the state with other groups. So letting the world know you exist is a pretty important task. And I think, earlier the better, not waiting until you're far along. A galvanizing vision and engagement process. So, making sure that you really are, you have something that's bold and important to say, and that you think is going to stir others to participate, as opposed to something that might sound a little milquetoast and sort of, trite even, but something that really is going to kind of catch people's attention and make them be interested and want to join up. And the engagement process too. This is clearly an area where we're experiencing challenges. Groups are sometimes accused of not being inclusive. They're not paying attention to the voices of others, particularly more vulnerable groups, that their focus on terms of their food system is too narrow, too local, too much local food, maybe not paying attention to hunger issues or paying attention to food chain worker concerns. And one thing where, I've had conversations with some groups who'll say something like, we make it clear that everybody's invited. We have a place at the table for everybody, but we're not finding that's enough. I mean, simply making those kinds of statements doesn't necessarily provide the encouragement or a feeling of being welcome that is necessary. So something, usually a more aggressive engagement process that really goes out and talks to people from different walks of life and is engaged with other food system sectors has been an important step that really needs to be taken, and it has to be done well and correctly. Assessment, strategic, or a food plan, of course, are important. They aren't necessarily the thing you have to do right away. They can follow once a food policy council is established, but making sure you have some clear idea of where you're trying to go. Some states, Michigan, Minnesota, have done particularly good jobs of putting together food plans, and that they are guiding documents for their work. Sometimes it's a food policy council, other times it's more of a food network that exists within the state. But either way, the food plan becomes something that everybody buys into, and that it's really does represent the interests of a pretty wide group of food system stakeholders. That should be followed by a work plan, some timelines, some deliverables, and actually knowing how you're going to measure this. I mean, how do we know if we've been successful? Don't skirt over that. Don't skip over these steps and say, well, we'll figure it out later on. I think people want to know more and more these days what we're going to get out of this. And then, of course, effective implementation strategies. How are we going to work? Are we going to be doing advocacy, let's say at the state legislature? Are we going to be networking with other groups to accomplish our ends? Are we really looking at networking just local food policy councils? Are we going to have staff that's going to be doing ongoing advocacy, education, and outreach, doing research on policy issues? These are those implementation steps, and we have to know how we're going to implement them. And then lastly, early wins. Groups get discouraged being together for maybe 2 years of planning and organizing and having not really done anything in terms of policy work. So actually being able to say, this is something we can do early on, and it might be relatively small, but we know that it'll help us as a group feel better and build our morale if we're able to accomplish something. So thinking about what early wins might look like has often been a key indicator of longer term success. So let's look at the next slide and the last slide. So some of this is really just the opposite of what I said. What are some of the challenges and some of the mistakes? While I think it's very important to undertake planning work and assessment work, some groups have stretched it out far too long, and that's when morale begins to slip. People begin to say, what is this about? Are we going to ever do anything? So keeping it within a reasonable time frame, and I'm sure someone will ask me, well, what's a reasonable time frame? I'm going to say probably, you really should be underway and up and running and doing something within a year and not stretching it out to, say, 2 years. Not having any funding, but maybe more importantly, not even having a fundraising plan. I mean, I have seen some groups who postponed doing any fundraising work at all for well into a year into their work before they even began that process. So if they're not able to raise funds, are they able to get in-kind support from some of their own members and some of their own participants? Knowing what that looks like would be very helpful. And again, not having any funding at all, but even worse, not even having a fundraising plan or having a fiscal agent. Again, sometimes groups spend really too much time trying to organize themselves into a nonprofit, into a 501c3. They start figuring out all their bylaws and doing a 501c application to the IRS. And that may be called for eventually, but it isn't necessarily the thing that you want to spend all your energy on in the beginning. So, getting down to business and deciding what your priorities are early on, and then spending time on some fundraising activities can be a better use of your time. Question of political support. I mean, unfortunately, I've seen, state food policy councils have come and gone based on who's in charge at their particular state house. And food policy councils can be very vulnerable at an early stage. And if they just get up and running and a new administration comes in and they're not supportive of the work of the Food Policy Council, well, that can be the death knell. So it's also important in considering how to organize a Food Policy Council. If you're in a very conservative state where, small government is sort of the mantra that the leaders are chanting at that time, you don't necessarily want to say, we want to be a part of state government. They're not going to be receptive. Political support is not going to be very strong when everybody else is trying to downsize government. But you might think in that case about taking an independent route so that you're creating a food policy council that has government participation, but is not dependent on government support. Again, just an opposite of what I said before, that a vision statement might not be very compelling. It doesn't have the participation of a number of people. It was perhaps the work of only one or two people or a small number. We've sometimes seen food policy councils that where leadership is just too hierarchical, that the power and direction and so forth are vested too much in a very small number of people, even sometimes only one person. The purpose of the Food Policy Council is not clear. This is definitely a big issue. Are we about organizing or networking local food policy councils? Are we going to do policy work at the state level? Something else? Education and outreach and so forth. These are questions that really have to be answered early on and not dragged out for 2 or 3 years down the road, and then everybody suddenly decides that they disagree on what they're supposed to be doing. Inclusivity issues haven't been resolved. This is often, like, do we have big ag at the table? Is this just about small ag and sustainable? How about bigger ag? In other words, sort of an ag in the middle sort of approach, bigger farms and farming organizations, but not necessarily big ag in the sense of corporate. These are issues that are much more prevalent at the state level. Then you don't find this kind of tension often at the local level. So that is something that definitely needs attention early on. Anti-hunger and food security groups may not be present because the groups that have founded the State Food Policy Council, who at least constitute the organizers, are much more enamored with simply small and local agriculture, and that seems to be what they're interested in, and they don't want to be inclusive of a wider array of issues such as food security or those that are brought up by food chain workers. And then lastly, the big outstanding question often is this a part of government? Do we have participation by state agencies? Is our independence threatened by it? If these aren't resolved early on, then you're going to be having those battles for a long time. Stakeholder interests are out of balance. Really the same thing I'm saying is that, is this too much about only one part of the food system? Or do we see a pretty good balance from all parts, all the critical parts? And then lastly, meeting locations and times aren't convenient. States are obviously bigger than locales, bigger than cities, bigger than counties. And they present some geographic and distance barriers for people to meet, and trying to, do you hold your meetings in different parts of a state? Do you hold them in different, and what do you rely more on, online communication? Those are, again, things that have been challenging for state food policy councils. So I'm going to bring it to a close there, and just I'd really be interested in what people's experiences have been themselves, and if among any of these points I've made, if there are some that resonate more than others, and how you may have resolved them as well.
Thanks, Mark. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to talk or make a comment.
So I was absolutely clear as a bell, right? And there's just absolutely no confusion. I'm so glad I could do that.
Or you can type comments in the chat box if you have any thoughts you want to share via chat.
I see some people on the line that are with state food policy councils, or perhaps in the early stages of them. I'd certainly be interested in hearing, what your reflections might be on what I said.
Hi, this is Dawn in Pittsburgh, and we've been in conversation at the state level about how to advance a statewide food policy council for, I think, both of the reasons and functions that you mentioned, both working on state policy as well as networking local food policy councils. And I just had a question around, so we're having this conversation, and we're hoping to convene a conversation in the fall, but we do have a governor's race, a governor's election. And so we have just a question around, we don't have clarity around whether it should be a state supported council or a state participating council. And with that election, I think that kind of puts us on a little bit of a timeline. We need to see how that goes, because it would currently be an extension of the current governor's food security partnership if it were embedded in the state. I was just curious to hear a little bit more about your take on the, do you go with that support within government if you have it? And what if there's a turn, what if it changes? The current governor is no longer in office. Just curious your thoughts on those things.
It's good. It's really, I think what I'm learning is that state food policy councils that find themselves firmly embedded in state government, in fact, they are a part of, or they may exist under the wing of the State Department of Agriculture, something like that. They don't have the flexibility that they often need in order to be effective. But on the other hand, they really do have to find ways to be inclusive of state agencies, and key agencies within the state have to be really at the table in one way or another. And so finding a sort of organizational structure that is going to allow you to maintain some independence, perhaps under the aegis of another organization, but makes it very clear that in terms of seats or participation, you definitely want state government to be at the table. That to me is, that it's not always an easy balancing act, but I do think it's probably the best way to try to get started. There's just been too much oscillation in terms of state politics that have made it difficult for food policy councils that, as I said earlier, started under one usually a more progressive political environment, and then the environment shifted to one that was more conservative, and they found themselves either out of business or struggling. Does that help?
Yeah, that's sort of my same thought. I was curious to hear if you thought the same thing. Yeah.
Mark, we have a comment from Daniel that in Tennessee they're beginning to wonder if it's worth trying to develop a statewide group when there are only 2 possibly local food policy councils.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily seen a correlation between a state food policy council and local food policy councils. Like, in other words, I don't think there's like such a thing as a critical mass of local food policy councils that you need to have in order to start a state food policy council. They tend to be pretty, they have a different function. There's different issues. I think that the state food policy council can certainly serve as a networking hub for local food policy councils. I think to some degree, a state food policy council can also inspire and support the development of local food policy councils where they're not already there yet, or maybe there's some energy in a particular area, but they haven't been able to quite, it hasn't gelled fully. So I do think that, I see them, the decision to just go ahead and try to start a state food policy council, I think should be more or less independent of, what's going on locally with food policy councils. But at the same time, keeping in mind what your role might be with respect to local food policy councils. Even if there's only 1 or 2, I mean, it can serve as a model. They can be, they can be supportive, and they can sort of suggest that, well, we're able to do a state council, a local council that might clear the way, that might make it easier to do a state council.
One last comment from Paul. And Paul, I'm not sure if you can talk, you are not able to do audio as well, but you said, I think we're beginning to see that the CFFN is a space for state groups and the local food policy councils to work together around policy, leveraging a lot more of the day-to-day policy depth while still holding space in the FPC,
California
Food Policy Council, for Food Policy Council peer-to-peer learning local work. And then,
so in other words, the state food council, or is it a network or I'm not sure which, but California, they can do both advocacy, and they can also serve as a networking hub. Yeah. I think that makes perfect sense. There's no reason why you can't do both.
Yep.
I'll give one example I'll give from New Mexico, where I live, having worked with the New Mexico Food and Ag Policy Council, is that the statewide advocacy work has been that the Food Policy Council has undertaken, and you heard about what they've done with Farm to School, received a tremendous amount of support from local groups, from emerging local food policy councils. And the local food policy councils often attend the state meetings, so there's a lot of synergy there. But so there's really no reason why you can't be supporting both directions. And in fact, I think there's a very much of a synergistic relationship between networking and advocacy work.
Great, thanks.
Somebody else.
About methods of measurement, about the importance of best practices and lessons learned from food system coalitions and policy councils on measuring the complexities of measuring what they're doing and the big picture changes. We actually did a webinar on this topic, and we also have a monitoring and evaluation guide that we made back in January. So we can share those with you in the follow-up email if that sounds good.
Mark, any last thoughts?
I don't think so. I think I've told you everything I know. I managed to put everything I know down to 2 slides. That's not bad for a life, I'm working on 1. Little time left.
Great. So thanks to everybody who joined today. We will be getting out some of these resources. It's been a really diverse set of topics to talk about, so we appreciate your participation, and especially to you diehards who stayed till the end. It's great to have you, and we'll be soliciting topics for the next call, which will be in a couple months, I think.
Yeah, probably September, October.
Yeah. Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.